Let me show you guys the components that you're gonna need.
Moment of truth just to test it out. Everything's working.
Yo, what's good, my peoples? It's IllRoller16 bringing you guys another video. Today we're gonna do another mod on the MX3. We're gonna upgrade the gauge cluster, the actual instrument cluster. Here is a factory gauge cluster, and we're gonna actually modify this to have LED gauge needles and new gauge faces or overlays, and just give it a whole different look. So I decided to do this modification on the gauge cluster a couple years ago after driving to Miami, which is about 4 to 5 hours away from me. I was down there for a car show in the Turbo MX3, and on the way down there, the stock green gauge cluster just wasn't cutting it, and it just made the whole trip really creepy. So, you know, when I got home, as soon as the first thing I did was research on how to upgrade the gauge cluster, and I did that a couple years ago. So now I'm going to do it to the white MX3, the all motor project. And I think it really sets off the interior and gives the car a more modern look. This actually goes for a bunch of other cars as well. If you have an older chassis in the 90s that doesn't have glow needles, this is going to be a definite improvement for you, and you can pretty much follow the same steps. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into modifying the gauge cluster and get it installed. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so before we get started in doing the upgrades to the instrument cluster, to the gauge cluster on the MX3, let me show you guys the components that you're gonna need. Let me start with, obviously, the gauge cluster. I highly recommend getting a spare gauge cluster. I got this off eBay. It's pretty clean. But I highly recommend getting a spare gauge cluster, so that way if anything goes wrong, you have a spare gauge cluster that you for sure works, you know what I mean? The second piece, LED needle kit. I'll leave links in the description. I got this off of eBay. They have different colors. I think they're based in the UK. I'm in the US, but I paid for the shipping because this is really hard to come by. Let me open it so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So these are LEDs actually, and I found one other place that offers it in the US. I'll see if I can find the link, but if your car didn't come with the acrylic for the lighting or the LEDs, you're gonna need this. So I want to show you guys why the MX3 doesn't have any lit needles. This is a Miata cluster. So the Miata cluster, this is what I got the needles off of. I think this is an NB or an NA Miata. So the Miata has good needles because it has the acrylic pieces that light the needles. So let me see if I can show you guys here. So you see this acrylic piece? This is what lights the needles. So it grabs light from the bulbs down in here, and it transfers all the light to here, the frosted portion of the acrylic, and that's what light the needles. On other cars, they have a whole circuit board on the bottom, and they have the needles that lay flat. I think they're SMDs. That are on the circuit boards, and they shoot light straight up. But the older cars have this acrylic. The Mazda Mx3 has neither, not the acrylic, and it doesn't have the LEDs, obviously, so that's why you have to get the needle kit. Here is a cluster this is an MX3 cluster that I've taken apart. So as you can see there is no acrylic in here whatsoever. So that is while we're doing all this extensive modification to the cluster. It's definitely worth it, man. It's going to make your car stand out. It's going to make the whole thing more enjoyable, and it's the little details that matter. Yeah, it's definitely a worth it modification. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. So it comes with 2 discs that are larger and 2 smaller discs for like the fuel gauge and for the temperature gauge, but you're going to need this. It also comes with needles, which I don't think I'm going to use, and it comes with the dimmer, which I'll probably just splice into the factory dimmer. But you need this. Without this, there is no lit needles. And then you're gonna need a bunch of different needles. I got these from the junkyard, from the scrap yard. I have a whole Tupperware full of different needles. These are kind of some of the different ones. This is from a Mazda 3. This is from a Nissan. This is from a Nissan. On my other MX-3, I use ones from a Miata, which is this one. This is a Miata with the chrome caps. This is a Nissan as well. And this one's pretty cool. This one's from a RSX Type S, but you definitely want to have some spare needles, different lengths, different sizes. Pause. So that way you can, you know, mix and match and figure out what works best for you. And then here are the gauge. This is the gauge face kit. I'm going to be very careful. So these are overlays that go over the factory gauges. I did white. We really don't have that many options for the MX-3. There's only 3 options. I already did the black one on the other MX-3, so I wanted to do something different, so I did a white one. Kind of old school, but hopefully it turns out good. Comes with the dimmer. And again, I'll leave links in the description for everything. But these are the main components that you're going to need to do the LED upgrade to your instrument cluster. And then also you might want to get some LED bulbs on the back. These twist out, and you're going to want to replace these with LEDs. I have a couple white LEDs left over, so I'm going to use those. But I'll show you everything during the install process. But these are your main components that you're going to need as a foundation to even think about doing this project. So again, this isn't for the faint of heart. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is unscrew this right here. See if I can show y'all. So then that comes out. Now we're gonna get the acrylic off. We could take these 2 off instead. And then I think it'll all come off as one unit. 2 screws. So what we'll do is we're just gonna pop these tabs out one by one, little by little. Carefully, trying not to break anything. There it is, all one piece. So we'll put that to the side, and we're at the gauge cluster now. These are the 2 pieces that cover the check engine lights, etc. This is where you would want to have some latex gloves if you want to be really, really meticulous. This is where we're going to grab a fork and a lighter and get this out. And we're going to melt these off. So this is super important here for the tachometer and the speedometer. these are gonna come out no problem. But these, the gas level and the engine temperature, I wouldn't even risk it. I would just melt those off. So we're gonna actually grab a lighter, we're gonna burn them off, and we need the metal needles to stay intact. Some latex gloves, fork and a lighter. If you got the longer lighters, probably better. Stick a fork under there. All right, here's one. Here's the tack. Save the needle. I'll see if I can get it out of it. Here we go. This one came off clean. I don't care about this needle. All I care about is the pin. All right. This is where I can mess up, guys. So, all right, let's start. Let's melt these off, man. Shit. There you go. Oh my God, really? Go grab a different lighter. Okay, here we go. Whole different lighter. Okay. Part of it melted off. So the needle's still on there. Let me show y'all. But when we take the gauge off, we're gonna have to take this gauge off and melt the rest of this black plastic away, but we want the needle still in the gauge. We do not want the needle to come out. So next, let's do the fuel. Let's pop this out. I'm not playing any games with this fuel gauge. There it is. Oof, melted off. So now we're gonna take this gauge off and we're gonna melt the rest of this off. Pow. These are dead front printing. If you're familiar with what that is, dead front, no light passes through, only at the spots where it's supposed to. Can't do nothing with these. You might be able to get some of the green off, but it'll never be as good as actual gauge faces. So overlays or replacement gauge faces. So right now we're popping the speedo gauge face off. There's a speedo. Make sure to save the stopper here. If yours comes with a stopper, make sure to keep the stopper on there. And then let's do the tack. So here's the tack, same thing. Save the gauge stopper. Now we're gonna get the plastic that's remaining on there that is half melted. We're gonna get that off. So this right here and this right there. There it is. Woo! So now we're going to melt the rest of this one off. That's what we want. The rest after this is smooth sailing. Ooh. Don't want to melt the clock. There it is. Woo! 2 clean needle pins. 1, 2. Again, I'm telling you guys from experience, it's easier to melt them off. I have a graveyard of gauge clusters. Well, not a graveyard, but I got a few gauge clusters that I messed up because of these 2 gauges. So those are the most difficult one, guys. So now we're ready to glue the needles on. All right, so this is what we're gonna use here real quick. Gonna use this Gorilla Glue. I'm not sure if I'm gonna use the brush, or I'll probably use the brush to be a little more precise. But what we're gonna do here is we're gonna glue the discs. I'm gonna start with the temperature, and then after we do all this, then we'll do the overlays. All right, so we're gonna add glue to the back of the disc. All right, so speedometer next. Same concept, except with the bigger disc. So for this one, for the speedo, we're gonna have to cut out a notch because there's no groove for anything to go into. So we'll cut out a notch. Let's see where we want the wires to run through. So we're gonna cut the notch a little diagonal, right around there. Let's go. Let me actually, before we go, let me check the tack, same thing. I'm pretty sure we're gonna have to cut out a notch for the tack. Yeah, we can cut a notch out for both. All right, gonna use one of these diamond bits. Check it out. Yeah. Do the speedo. So here's the speedo, just a straight circle. And we're just gonna cut a channel diagonal for the wires to go through. That's it. Took all of 2 seconds. back to the studio. Got the notch in. Got the notch in. So now we can start gluing this. Put your gloves on if you want to. All right, that should be plenty of glue. There we go, make sure our wires are there. There it is. So we'll just hold it here for a couple seconds for the glue to settle. Uh-oh. Wants to stick to my finger. All right, so we're just gonna let that sit. Next, let's glue the tachometer, same thing. Slide the wires into place. Here's the back. Wires are in the groove. All right, so we're gonna let these dry for a few minutes and then we'll be able to install. Remember, let me get this needle out of the tachometer. The tachometer came out with the needle. So I am So we're going to put this back in place. That's it. Now it's just a matter of waiting for these to dry a little bit and we'll put the gauge faces on and that's it. So I will be back shortly. Everything's ready to be installed. So, gave it enough drying time. These two things out so that we can put in the temperature gauges and the fuel gauge. They just clip on. You need them for stock gauges, but not for these. The most important thing is the needles, so now we have room to work. So let's grab our overlay, put the other ones aside. Here's our overlay. Overlay goes right on top. So next, let's do the speedo. We'll put the screws in for the speedo. Alright, so just found out the hard way. The long screws go on the temp gauge, short screws go on the speedo and the tach. Anyways, let's move on with the tachometer. So same thing, we're gonna put this on the pegs. Make sure the needle stopper is in there. Just a little bit snug, nothing too crazy, man. Your gauges aren't gonna move anywhere, so don't over tighten these. That's good enough. There we go. Get some acrylic paint.
Jim. Thank you. Let's roll. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a different red.
Yeah, it's a different red. All right, my people. So we're over here at the table doing arts and crafts. This covers the clock on the car. So the clock on the MX-3 is green, and it's because of this. This has a green tint to it. So I'm gonna show you guys. I got the LED on. Ugh. So LED. So that's why your clock comes out green. The clock is actually white. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna make it red to match. So we're gonna spray this translucent red for model cars, and we'll have a red clock. Or if you have a blue, if you want blue, you can spray it blue. If you want it black, whatever, you can tint it whatever color you want. So we're gonna do red. Yeah. This is what we got so far. As you can see, this Miata chrome ring isn't completely center. Still debating on if I'm going to keep it or not, but for right now I'm going to leave it since it's super glued in. I wired these all together. These are the LEDs that go to the rings. Zip tied everything. I soldered these and shrink wrapped them, and then I'll finally wrap them with some extra shrink wrap over here. But yeah, it's ready to go in the car, and then we'll throw the needles on and see what everything will look like. So yeah.
All right, let's take out the old cluster. Take out the aux. Take off the shift knob. No, you're not in the way.
Damn.
You see where the gas is at? Right above you. So it is this black and red wire. That's the switch lights. So right now, no power. You want to turn the switch on. So that's what we're going to tap into for the whole circuit. And that goes to the dimmer switch. So yeah. Moment of truth just to test it out. I'm going to set the needles. The gas gauge I could tell from my old cluster. Move this out the way. I'm pretty much on empty. You can see the lights on. So.
All right, so we just set the needles. Car's still a mess. Everything's taken apart, but that's what it's looking like.
turn the lights off. That's what it looks like. On, off, on, off. Alright, we're gonna take the cluster off. Everything's working. And then we'll seal everything up. So yeah.
At Speedway, we're committed to keeping your stores open, clean, and safe to use.
All right, my people, that's pretty much it for the LED upgrade on the gauge cluster for the Mazda Mx-3. A couple of final thoughts and things I want to bring up to you guys is this is a very tedious project. I know it looks easy, but it's a mix of like mechanicals and arts and crafts. So just be patient, get an extra gauge cluster. They're like 20, 30 bucks at the junkyard or on eBay, and take your time with it. I did mine in one day, but if it was up to me again, just because I was in a rush, I had these parts sitting for so long that I was kind of anxious to get it done, and I'm impatient. But I would probably take a couple days, a week, whatever. Take your time, and there's no rush. As long as you have a gauge cluster that's running in your car, you should be able to take your time. So get an extra gauge cluster. Very important. These two things. One, if you don't want any sort of difficulties, use the Mazda Miata needles if you have a Mazda. The Miata needles are the best needles. Out of all the Tupperware of needles that I have, the Miata needles were the best ones, and those are the ones I ended up using. Nissan has some decent needles, but the Miata ones fit just right. If you're gonna use other needles, you may have to do other modifications. And then third, use the color LEDs that you want the needles to glow. So if you want the needles to glow red, use red LEDs. If you want them to glow blue, use blue LEDs. The only reason you should use white LEDs is if you want the needles to glow white, or you're trying to use a color that's not offered in the LEDs. So if you're trying to do like purple or pink or turquoise or something like that for the glow needles, then you'd have to use white or maybe like a blue or a green, and then you would paint your needles to mix and make the turquoise or whatever color you're trying to make. So just to go over again, some final suggestions and thoughts. One, get a spare gauge cluster, take your time, have patience. Two, use the Miata needles. If you're using a Mazda, the Mazda Miata needles are the best fit and have tons of aftermarket support. And three, match the LED needles with the color that you want the needles to glow. So yeah, that's pretty much all the final tips that I have for the gauge cluster. And overall, have a good time with the project and make it your own, you know what I mean? So that's pretty much it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if you have any questions. Your best way to get a hold of me is via Instagram. Just hit me up in the messages or email me. Again, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe for future videos. I got the headlights coming up next, and then we're gonna start tearing into the performance parts for the MX3s, both of them, the turbo and the all-motor one. So make sure to stay tuned for that. This is IllRoller16 checking out. Salute.
Oh, let me sit down. What the f? Are you serious right now? This shit literally broke, dude.